Rich but poor, why poverty encompasses more than income. Poverty is the inability to have a sufficient quality of life. Therefore, it would be most accurately measured by the supplemental poverty measure and a measurement of capabilities.
Poverty. What do you think about when you hear the word poverty? Most people think about money. However, poverty is about more than just economic and financial inequality. Poverty is concerned with how people are actually doing and how that affects their quality of life. Some would disagree with this approach to poverty. For example, John Iceland, in his book Methods of Measuring Poverty, defines poverty as economic or income deprivation. While financial shortcomings are definitely an important aspect of poverty, we agree with Amartya Sen when in his book Inequality Reexamined, he said, "To have an inadequate income is not a matter of having an income level below an externally fixed poverty line, but to have an income below what is adequate for generating the specified levels of capabilities for the person in question." In other words, poverty is the inability to have a sufficient quality in life.
So, how can you measure quality of life? Currently in the United States, we associate quality of life with income by using an absolute measure to distinguish who is poor. An absolute measure creates a threshold based on income that does not fluctuate according to standard of living. The official poverty measure, which is known as the OPM, is an absolute measure. Therefore, the only resources taken into account is the gross annual pre-tax income. The threshold is based on a 1950s study by Molly Orshansky, who concluded that families spend one-third of their income on food. The threshold is set by multiplying the cost of food adjusted for family composition by 3. If a family's resources, income, are not above the threshold, the family is considered poor. We do not believe that this is an accurate way to measure poverty in today's society because the OPM is outdated, considering it was first used in the 1960s. The OPM is flawed because it does not subtract non-discretionary expenses such as transportation, childcare, and medical expenses, nor does it add government benefits. The OPM also does not take into account savings, debt, geographical differences, modern household composition, and the depth or severity of poverty. All of these factors are imperative if you want to know how people are actually doing.
In contrast to an absolute measure of poverty, many European countries utilize a relative measure. According to John Iceland in Poverty in America, poverty, is based on the notion that poverty is relative to a society's existing level of economic, social, and cultural development. The most common type of a relative measure is based on median income. A country calculates the median income and then usually sets the poverty line at 40 to 60% of that median income. For example, if the median income is $30,000 a year and the country sets the poverty threshold at 50% of the median, then families that have an income of less than $15,000 a year are considered poor. Unlike an absolute measure, a relative poverty measure is not constant because it adjusts to the country's particular standard of living, which can be misleading during times of economic growth and downturn because a threshold is similar to a moving target.
If an absolute measure is too outdated and a relative measure is too volatile, how should we accurately measure poverty in the United States? During the 1990s, the United States National Academy of Sciences developed a quasi-relative measure to combat the critiques of both absolute and relative measures of poverty. This led to the creation of the Supplemental Poverty Measure, the SPM. The resources included in the SPM are income, that has non-discretionary expenses and all taxes subtracted from it, and has benefits, both near cash and in-kind added. Some examples of non-discretionary expenses include medical out-of-pocket expenses, childcare, and transportation costs. The main near cash benefit is the Earned Income Tax Credit. In-kind benefits include food stamps, Medicaid, government housing, and many other programs. To set the SBM threshold, households are ordered based on their expenditures on food, clothing, shelter, and utilities. From there, those particular expenditures of the household at the 33rd percentile are multiplied by 1.2. This figure becomes the poverty line. However, we cannot forget that the poverty line is adjusted for household size, household composition, and geographical differences.
We support the SPM because we believe that the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Common critiques of the SPM are the complexity and diversity of measuring the resources. But if our goal is to establish how people are actually doing, we want as much information as possible. As Rebecca Blank says in the Supplemental Poverty Measure, a new tool for understanding U.S. poverty, a primary benefit of the SPM is that it will reflect changes in tax transfer and work support programs in contrasting the official poverty measure, which only reflects changes in policies that affect before tax cash income. While this will make the SPM a more complex statistic, it also makes it more useful in understanding policy effects. People also criticize the SPM for lacking previous data to make comparisons with, but we cannot ignore the fact that any new poverty measure would also lack this. Our country cannot be afraid of implementing a new measure simply because it will change how people view and measure poverty.
Capability is a person's ability to do or achieve certain functionings. Functionings are the things you do. There are internal capabilities, which are the abilities that one is born with or taught. There are also combined capabilities, which are the sum of internal capabilities and the capabilities society and circumstance makes available to you. For example, going to college is a functioning. Whether or not you're able to achieve that functioning is based upon your internal capabilities and combined capabilities. You may have the internal capabilities to go to college, like intelligence or ambition, but you may lack the combined capabilities to make that happen, like financial security. It's important to measure capabilities because everyone deserves to have the opportunity to achieve basic functionings like health, education, and security, among many others. We have a moral obligation to provide everyone with those capabilities, which Sin called substantial freedoms, a set of opportunities to choose and to act.
Wait, so you may be asking yourself, is it even possible to measure what a person or group of people is capable of? We believe that you can measure what specific groups of people's capabilities through gross capability assessments, meaning that tracking a certain groups of people's literacy rates will reveal information on their education capabilities. This information is extremely important to combat the roots of poverty. Another example would be a certain neighborhood has a high childhood obesity rate. This would be indicative that they lack good nutrition and sources of exercise. Now, knowing this information, government could decide to address the problem not through policy, but through the construction of a public park aimed at encouraging exercise among the youth. By measuring capabilities, we can establish ways to help improve impoverished people's lives by identifying the problem and implementing solutions not based on direct monetary exchange. Now you may be asking yourself, what about rich people who lack certain capabilities? Are they really poor? In a sense, yes. They may have all the money in the world, but if they lack certain capabilities, they could have a poor quality of life. This is not to say that everyone who is considered poor because of capabilities study should receive government assistance. This is why we propose looking at capabilities from a gross perspective. If our goal is to discover how people are actually doing, then it is important to know both how the wealthy and the poor are doing, not just what their income can buy them.
Poverty is the inability to have a sufficient quality of life. Therefore, poverty would be most accurately measured by the supplemental poverty measure and a measurement of capabilities. These two methods complement each other because it is impossible to ignore economic disparity when evaluating poverty, and it would be unwise to ignore what real opportunities people can achieve. While no measure will ever tell us everything we need to know about impoverished people's quality of life, these two methods, when used in conjunction, effectively convey to as great an extent as possible who suffers from poverty and how to address the problem of poverty in America.